Marcus Reeves was 40 years old, a Union operations foreman who had spent 8 years in the Navy before he spent 12 more building things on the ground. He had a way of being still that unnerved people who expected more noise. He didn't raise his voice in meetings. He didn't chase arguments. He had stood watch in places where losing focus meant something, and that had calibrated him in a way that most people couldn't read, and a few people, eventually, came to regret underestimating. He drove a 4-year-old Chevy Colorado with a cracked taillight he kept meaning to fix. He had a pair of mechanic's gloves folded over the passenger visor that had been there so long they'd taken the shape of the visor. Every morning he was up at 5:15, made 2 cups of coffee, drank one standing at the kitchen window watching whatever the sky was doing, and left the second on the counter for his wife. For the last 3 months, the second cup had been sitting there untouched when he came home at night. He had noticed. He had not said. When Dion Frazier walked across a parking lot on a Thursday evening in September and told Marcus Reeves that he'd better stay away from what was his, he had a look on his face that Marcus had seen before. The look of a man who had decided what kind of situation he was in without checking whether he was right. He had no idea who Marcus called that night. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The parking lot outside the county rec center smelled like asphalt and cut grass from the field behind it. It was 7:12 on a Thursday evening in late September, still light enough to see clearly, but the light going orange and low. Marcus had just come out of a union steward meeting that had run 40 minutes over because of a grievance filing nobody wanted to own. He was walking toward the Colorado when he heard the footsteps behind him. Not running. Deliberate. He didn't turn around immediately. He had learned, a long time ago, that how you turn around tells the other person everything about what you believe the situation is. He finished his step, got to the truck, put his hand on the door handle, then turned. The man was about his height, broader through the shoulders in a way that was mostly for show, the kind of broad that came from a gym and not from work. He was wearing a fitted shirt in weather that called for a jacket, which told Marcus something. He stopped about 6 feet away. "You're Marcus," the man said. It was not a question. Marcus looked at him. "Dion Frazier," the man said, like the name was supposed to mean something. It did mean something. Marcus had seen the name on his wife Simone's phone 4 months ago, sideways. In a moment she had not intended. He had filed it away the way he filed things, without reacting, without announcing, without deciding yet what it meant. He had given her 3 more months to tell him something. She hadn't. "I know who you are," Marcus said. Dion stepped forward, not all the way, just enough. "Then you know she's done with you. And I'm telling you now, man to man, stop showing up where she's going to be. You understand me?" Marcus looked at him for a moment. He thought about several things. He thought about the parking lot, and the light, and the 6 feet between them, and the particular quality of performance in the other man's. He thought about a gunnery sergeant he had served under who said that the man who announces his willingness to fight is always the man who hopes he won't have to. He thought about the VA housing loan. The one in his name. The one Simone had asked him to extend 8 months ago so they could refinance the property. The one his attorney had told him had been used to fund a purchase that was not their marital home. "I understand you," Marcus said. Dion held the 6 feet for another moment, deciding whether that was enough. Apparently, he decided it was. He turned and walked back across the parking lot toward a black Escalade with dealer plates. Marcus watched him go. He got in the truck. He sat there for a moment with his hand. Then, he took out his phone and scrolled to a name he had not called in 14 months. What Marcus had built over 8 years of marriage was the kind of life that looked ordinary from the outside, because he had made it look that way on purpose. He was not a man who needed things to be visible to believe they were real. He had married Simone Price in October, 7 years ago, at a small ceremony at his aunt's house, with 22 people and a cake his aunt made herself. Simone had wanted something bigger. He had said they could do something bigger on the 5-year anniversary. The 5-year anniversary came and went, and they didn't do anything bigger, because by then the conversations that used to last until midnight were ending before 10, and he had told himself it was the natural settling of things. He had told himself that a lot. He had spent 3 weekends rebuilding the back deck of the house they bought on Garfield Avenue. He had done it alone, because Simone had been, that particular season, busy with things she described in summary and not in detail. He had refinished the floors in the living room and the hallway. He had rewired the kitchen himself after the inspection cited doing it on a Saturday over 14 hours because he didn't pay someone else for work he could do right himself. He had spent in aggregate more hours improving that house than any contractor he could have hired. His name was on the mortgage. He had never once thought about that as a fact until his attorney pointed it out. The year before everything changed, Simone had started working later. He had not questioned it, because he worked late himself, and he understood what it meant to be absorbed by something. He had asked once, "Everything okay with the job?" And she had said, "Yeah." Just a lot going on, and he had taken that at its word, because he was a man who extended good faith until there was a clear reason not to. There had been a clear reason, as it turned out, for longer than he had understood. That was what he hadn't understood, not until the Thursday evening in the parking lot. Her name was Loretta Reeves. His aunt, she was 63 years old and had worked as a clerk in the county court system for 27 years before her knees gave out, and she retired to a yellow house on Pemberton Street and a habit of knowing things before they became problems. She was small and straight-backed and had a way of listening without her expression, giving anything, which was a skill she had developed in 30 years of watching people say things in front of judges that they should have kept private. She had not been surprised when Marcus called her that Thursday night at 8:30. "I know," she said, before he had finished explaining. He stopped. "How long?" "Long enough." She paused. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm in the truck." "Good, come here. Eat first, then we'll talk." He drove to Pemberton Street. She had food on the table before he got his jacket off. He ate. She sat across from him and waited until he had put the fork down before she slid a manila folder across the table, the way someone places a document they have been holding for the right moment. "I've been keeping this since April. I didn't want to tell you before you were ready to hear it. And I didn't want to tell you until I had all of it." She had all of it. The first item in the folder was a printout of a property record, a townhouse on the north side, purchased 6 months ago. The buyer of record was a holding LLC. The LLC was registered to a residential address. The residential address was Dion Frazier's. The second item was a loan summary. Marcus's VA housing entitlement, the benefit he had earned through 8 years of service. The one Simone had asked him to extend for the refinancing. The one he had agreed to because she had said it would lower the rate on their current mortgage. It had not been used to lower the rate on their current. It had been used as the funding instrument for the townhouse LLC purchase. His benefit. His name on the financing. A property he had never seen in an LLC he had never agreed to, purchased with a resource that belonged to him by virtue of 8 years he had given to something that cost him considerably more than money. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He read the document again, not because he hadn't understood it the first time, because he wanted to be precise about what he was looking at before he said anything about it. "There's more," Loretta said. Her voice was even. She refilled his coffee. The third item was the one that made the shape of it visible. Dion Frazier was a licensed residential contractor in the county. His contracting license, his ability to pull permits, to bid on public contracts, to operate his business at all, was in good standing. It was in good standing because his license renewal had been processed 6 weeks ago without. Frazier Construction LLC had 3 active bids pending with the County Housing Authority. Total contract value, $380,000. His license is clean, Loretta said. His bids are in. His business depends on that license being clean. She looked at Marcus across the table. And your VA benefit is in his LLC's purchase documents. Marcus looked at all of it spread across. He was not a man who read blueprints one line at a time. He read them whole, held the full picture in his head, saw where the load paths ran, understood how the structural elements related to each other. He was doing that now. He could see every connection, every line running from one document to the next, back to the same originating point. His name had been used. Not incidentally, deliberately, his military service converted into a financial instrument for another man's business. His wife's cooperation, the mechanism. The parking lot confrontation, the last thing he would have expected from a man whose professional standing depended entirely on no one looking too closely at how his recent property had been financed. He came to the parking lot tonight, Marcus said. Loretta nodded slowly. Men who have something to hide sometimes try to manage it with noise. Marcus thought about that. He thought about the 6 feet and the dealer plates, and the way Dion had turned and walked back to the Escalade when Marcus said nothing that could be used. He had not been afraid of the parking lot. He had been 4 steps ahead of it. "I need to make a call," he said. Loretta said, "I figured." He didn't move fast. That was the thing about the next 6 weeks that Simone and Dion had no way to account for. They were waiting for noise. They were braced for the argument, the confrontation, the social media post, the angry call to mutual friends. That was the version of Marcus they had prepared for, the one who reacted, who fought from the wound forward. That was not the version of Marcus who existed. The man he called that Thursday night was named Colonel Jerome Whitfield. Retired, Jerome had been Marcus's commanding officer during his final 2 deployments, and he had spent the 14 years since retiring building one of the most respected labor and civil rights law practices in the state. His firm, Whitfield, Okafor and Associates, occupied 2 floors of a building downtown and had a reputation for methodical, undecorated work that held up because it was built correctly the first time. Jerome picked up on the second ring. Marcus said, "I need a referral. And I may need your input on a VA fraud matter." There was a pause. Not a long one. "When can you come in?" "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. I'll have the coffee." At 7:03 the next morning, Marcus sat across a desk from Jerome Whitfield and put Loretta's folder on the table. Jerome read every page the way Marcus had learned to read blueprints, not rushing, not skimming, looking at the full picture. When he finished, he set the folder down and said the words Marcus expected. "There's a VA fraud angle here. A clear one." He referred Marcus to a colleague, a civil attorney named Danielle Price, who specialized in residential fraud and benefit misappropriation. Danielle Price, as it happened, was on the County Housing Authority's advisory board. She knew which bids were pending. She knew what a licensing complication meant for a contractor mid-bid. She called Marcus at 7:15 the following Monday morning. Her voice was level and unhurried, in the way of someone who had done this many times and understood that the information was not improved by dramatizing it. Your entitlement was used without your documented consent. That's a civil claim and potentially a federal one. We file both. She paused. I also want you to know that the Housing Authority will be notified as part of standard discovery. They'll pull the license review on their own. I don't have to prompt that. It happens automatically. Marcus said, I understand. Don't do anything else, she said. Don't call him. Don't call her. Don't show up anywhere connected to this. Just let it move. He let it move. Simone called twice in the third week. Her first voicemail was soft. She had heard, through the network of shared friends that every marriage leaves behind, that Marcus had been talking to an attorney. She said she hoped they could resolve things without it getting complicated. She said she wanted to be fair. Her voice had the quality of someone who believed they were still in a position to define fairness. Her second voicemail, 4 days later, was different. The softness had tightened around the edges. She said he was making this harder than it needed to be. She said Dion hadn't done anything. She said Marcus knew what the marriage had been for the last 2 years, and he shouldn't pretend otherwise. He listened to both messages twice, not because they upset him, because he wanted to note carefully how fast she had moved from cooperative to pressured, because the speed of that movement told him something about what she had been told was coming. He didn't call back. He went to work. He ran his job sites. He answered every question his crew asked him the same way he always did, fully, precisely, without irritation. His foreman on the Calloway Street job told him later that you couldn't have told anything was different. That was by design. Jerome Whitfield called him on a Thursday in late October. He said, the Housing Authority pulled the license review this morning. They do that when a fraud disclosure lands in a pending bid file. Fraser's bids are on administrative hold. A pause. He's going to know this came from somewhere. Marcus said he should have thought about that before he walked across a parking lot. Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then, come in Tuesday. I want you to hear what Danielle has. Marcus arrived 26 minutes early. The conference room was on the 9th floor of Whitfield, Okafor and Associates. Long table, dark wood, a wall of windows on the west side with the city below. A room that was designed to feel like the weight of things was taken seriously here. Marcus sat at one end with a glass of water and waited. Danielle Price arrived at 9:52, followed by a fraud specialist from the VA regional office, a woman named Carter, who had driven in from Philadelphia that morning and carried a briefcase that she set on the table without opening yet. Jerome sat at the head of the table and kept his jacket on. The room was quiet in a way that was different from ordinary silence. They came in at 10:05. Dion's attorney first, a man named Samuels who Marcus had never met, but whose expression when he entered the room suggested he had been told this was a property dispute, and was now understanding it was something else. Then Dion, who came through the door with the same performance of physical confidence he'd brought to the parking lot, and whose eyes went to Marcus first, and then to the people around Marcus, and then began a very quick recalibration. Simone was not there. She had declined, through her own attorney, to attend. That told its own story. Danielle opened the meeting. She thanked everyone and said there were disclosures that needed to be made before any discussion of resolution could occur. She opened her folder. The first document she placed on the table was Marcus's VA certificate of eligibility, followed by the loan assumption record attached to the Fraser LLC property purchase. She walked through it with the unhurried clarity of someone who had prepared this particular sequence many times. Mr. Reeves's VA housing entitlement was applied to this transaction, she said. Mr. Reeves did not sign any agreement authorizing that application. We have his signature record from the relevant period. She paused. There is no document that authorizes this use. We have looked. She placed the second document on the table. The formal notification from the VA regional office, co-signed by Carter, outlining the federal misappropriation review that had been initiated 6 days prior. Carter opened her briefcase. The third document was the one that made the table go still. It was the Housing Authority's administrative hold notice on Fraser Construction's 3 pending bids, citing the open fraud review. $380,000 in pending contracts. On hold. Pending resolution of the review. Resolution that would take, at minimum, 4, and that would live permanently in the license review record regardless of outcome. Samuels put the document down. He looked at Dion. He said nothing, but his expression said everything that needed to be said between a lawyer and a client who had not told him the full story. Dion's face went through several things in the space of 2 seconds. The confidence didn't leave all at once. It left the way weight leaves a structure when a load-bearing element is removed, first a settling, then a shift. Then the visible understanding that the thing that was supposed to hold wasn't going to. He looked at Marcus once, the same way he had looked at him across the parking lot. Only now the 6 feet was not in his favor. Marcus, he had brought nothing to the table except himself, and that had been the point. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Jerome's hand, then Carter's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back once, not to the room, not to Samuels, not to the Housing Authority document. He said it to Dion, and only to Dion, in the same unhurried voice he used on job sites when he needed something understood clearly. "You challenged the wrong man," he said. "Not because of what I can do to you, because you didn't bother to find out what you'd already done to yourself." He walked out. He did not look back. It did not happen all at once. The VA fraud review took 5 months. At the end of it, the entitlement misappropriation finding meant the LLC property purchase was flagged in the title record, a complication that made the townhouse effectively unsellable without resolution. Dion's 3 Housing Authority bids were not reinstated. His license remained active, technically, but the review notation followed it into every public bid system in the county. He lost 2 private clients in the first quarter alone, clients who had run their own checks and found the open review before he had a chance to explain it. Simone moved out of the townhouse by March. Not because she wanted to. Because carrying 2 households on one contractor's income, when that contractor's income had been cut by 1/3, was not sustainable. She moved into an apartment 2 miles from the Garfield Avenue house. Marcus knew this because mutual friends mentioned it once, and he said nothing in response except that he hoped she was doing okay, and meant it. The divorce was finalized in February. The marital home went to Marcus in the settlement, because his name was the only name on the original mortgage, and his labor was in every wall of it. He had measured twice, as he always did. He had cut once. He had 7 people on his crew by the following spring. His foreman on Callaway, a young man named Davis, who worked like someone who understood that reputation was a slow build, had taken on a supervisory role. Marcus gave him the title and the rate that went with it, because he had earned both, and Marcus did not withhold what people had earned. He answered every call the same day. Jerome Whitfield asked him once, over coffee in the Whitfield Okafor conference room, whether he had ever considered what he would have done if Dion had actually swung in that parking lot. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He picked up his cup. "I would have handled it," he said. Jerome said, "I know. That's not what I asked." Marcus looked out the window. He thought about the parking lot, the orange light, the 6 feet, the dealer plates. "I would have been disappointed," he said. The parking lot version was never the point. Jerome said nothing. He refilled Marcus's coffee. On a cold morning in February, 14 months after the parking lot, Marcus Reeves stood on the back deck he had rebuilt with his own hands on a Saturday in a season that felt like a different life now. The air was sharp. The neighborhood was quiet. He had his thermos, the same one he'd used for 6 years, a dent on the side from a job site, still sealed perfectly, and he was watching the sky do what February skies do, sit low and flat and gray, and not apologize for it. He thought about the man who had walked across a parking lot with a look on his face that said he had already decided what kind of situation he was in. He thought about how completely and specifically wrong that man had been. Not about Marcus's ability to fight, about the situation itself, about what it actually was, about what was already in motion before the first step was taken. He thought about 8 years of standing watch, about what it cost to be calibrated, about how that cost becomes an asset eventually, if you're patient enough to let it. He finished the thermos. He went inside and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.